Hi there, welcome to The Point. In case you don't know, I like hearing stories about video games. I liked hearing them when I worked in GameStop. I liked hearing them when I met new people, when I moved from country to country. And now I'm really lucky that in my job I get to hear stories about games all the time. And my favorite stories about games are the ones about weird, obscure, kind of shitty games that nobody in their right mind should ever remember. When the history of video games is written down, it'll be full of AAA blockbusters. Minecraft, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Tomb Raider, and Mario Bros. But some of the most interesting stories in video games come from games that nobody in their right mind should care about. Games that weren't really good, but were memorable for entirely other reasons. So today on The Point, we're going to talk about one of those stories, a story from my childhood, a story about a game that in all likelihood broke dozens of copyright laws, a story about a game that was kind of shit, and a story about a game that I still own 3 illegal copies of to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the great Gianna sisters.
The Point, Season 3, Episode 11, Mario's German Stepsister.
Okay, first some context. The year is 1988 and video game consoles are going through a bit of a revolution. This was the era of Atari, Spectrum, Nintendo, Sega, Commodore. These were the real console wars, not these shitty console wars you have nowadays where kids are complaining about a few lines of who gives a fuck resolution in a game that's coming out on 3 platforms on the same day. No, this was the area where games only came out on specific consoles. And one Christmas in Ireland, Santa Claus brought me, my brother and my sister a joint gift. And from then on, I was part of the Commodore clan. This is my Commodore Amiga 600. It's got a sweet keyboard, it plays floppy disks, and it's got 1 megabyte of RAM. So for comparison, this iPhone 6 has 1024 megabytes of RAM. But this was the first console, the first computer rather, that I ever owned. I was about 5 or 6 years old when we got it. And the games that I played on this machine informed the gamer I am today. Games like Sensible Soccer, Cannon Fodder, Speedball, Zool, James Pond. These were games that came out on Commodore first and eventually made their way onto other consoles and computers. And the opposite happened too. Amiga owners got ports of loads of games over the years. Games like XCOM and Monkey Island came over from the PC. But there was one system that never shared its toys. A new machine that had successfully invaded North America from Japan and was starting to sink its teeth into the European market. The Nintendo Entertainment System had reached European shores as of September of 1986, and its killer app Super Mario Bros. Had arrived the following May. This was a game that everyone was talking about, a colourful platformer with power-ups, bosses, smooth animations, great soundtrack, and challenging gameplay. Super Mario Bros. Was a 2D side-scrolling game for the NES in which you played Mario, an Italian guy who travelled through a fantastical world. Each level contained a number of coins, which can be collected for points. Collect 100 of these coins and you'd also get an extra life. Enemies were defeated by stomping on their heads. The game was full of floating platforms, bizarre pipes, and a castle sat at the end of each stage. Overworld stages were vivid and colourful, while underground stages were mostly dark and blue. The game featured memorable 8-bit music, had a total of 32 stages, and was 2-player. A second player could play as Mario's brother Luigi, and it had iconic boss fights, like this battle with King Koopa. The Great Gianna Sisters was a 2D side-scrolling game for the Amiga, in which you played Gianna, an Italian girl who travelled through a fantastical world. Each level contained a number of dream crystals, which could be collected for points. Collect 100 of these dream crystals, and you'd get an extra life. Enemies were defeated by stomping on their heads. The game was full of floating platforms, bizarre pipes, and a castle at the end of each stage. Overworld stages were vivid and colourful, while underground stages were mostly dark and brown. The game featured memorable 8-bit music, had a total of 32 stages, and was 2-player. A second player could play as Gianna's brother Luigi, Maria, and it had iconic boss fights, like this battle with some sort of fucking ant spider situation. The Great Gianna Sisters was a game made by German designer Armin Gessart under the studio title Time Warp, who wanted to make most of the growing interest in Nintendo's new franchise, and it worked. This Super Mario Bros. Clone spread quickly across the continent, however almost entirely through illegal channels. The Commodore Amiga had a horrific piracy problem that would eventually put Commodore out of business. I mean, the fact that the computer had a game copying utility included in the box probably didn't help. I bought dozens of games for this system, but my game library was huge, mostly made up of discs my brother had copied at various friends' houses. But even to a market full of pirates, Gianna Sisters was kind of a step too far. The ZX Spectrum version was reviewed by a bunch of magazines magazines but never made it into store shelves because of legal pressure. The same pressure that forced Amiga versions off the shelves in Germany. Years later, Nintendo would admit they were to blame. But that didn't stop Armin from making a sequel, of sorts. Gianna 2, Arthur and Maria in Future World, was in development for a number of months before Time Warp realized that Nintendo would probably get involved again. So they eventually changed the main characters into robots and renamed it Hard and Heavy.
The Gianna Sisters was a product of its time. I mean, by any stretch of copyright law, this game was taking the piss. We're no stranger to 2D homages to classic games now, but the Gianna Sisters came out just a couple of years after Super Mario Bros. However, it also seems that time's a healer.
In 2009, and perhaps the ballsiest move in the history of video games publishing, DDP Entertainment released a port of the original game on the Nintendo DS. So 22 years after the original game was chased out of German store shelves by Nintendo, a better looking carbon copy of Mario Bros. Was now a Nintendo handheld exclusive. And as if this wasn't weird enough, a fully fledged new Gianna Sisters game, Twisted Dreams, came out in 2012, and it's probably the best game in the series.
So there's a good chance we haven't heard the end of this story just yet.